Hey, what's up, guys? Michael Montero coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia. As you can see, I'm still getting things unpacked and settled here. The lab, various computer screens and computers. Actually got some right in front of me here. Still living out of boxes and getting things set up. But I talked to Tom Loeffler a few minutes ago. Just called him and talked to him just about the latest and greatest with Triple G. There's a lot going on with mandatories and everything else. So wanted to give you guys some quick updates and give you my thoughts on it. I apologize for the crudeness of this video. Like I said, I'm still getting things set up, so bear with me. First of all, with the back and forth with Golovkin demanding 50-50, quote unquote, and Oscar De La Hoya saying, no way, fight's off, we're moving forward, all that's BS. I just talked to Tom. He's still in talks with Eric Gomez right now. They're still discussing things. So that's still their top priority for Loeffler and for Golovkin. The whole 50-50 thing, and this is me talking here, okay? I'm not quoting anybody else. This is just my thoughts on it. That's the way negotiations are done. You start high, and then you meet somewhere in the middle. So obviously, Golovkin and Loeffler, they know they're not getting 50% with Canelo Alvarez. No other fighter in the sport right now gets 50-50 with Canelo Alvarez. So you start with that figure and then you work down. Now, it was a 70-30 split for the first fight. It was 65-35. That's what was agreed to for the rematch that was supposed to take place May 5th. Loeffler just told me just now on the phone, he felt, and so did Golovkin, based on what happened in the first fight, that 65-35 was unfair. They thought that they were making concessions just to do that. And, you know, I tend to agree. I think they won the first fight. And there is no bigger fight for Canelo than Golovkin. Obviously, there's no bigger fight for Golovkin than Canelo, but that goes both ways. So 65-35, I thought was, I agree with Loeffler there. That was them making a concession for Canelo based on what took place last September in Vegas. However, they agreed to that, but since 2 failed drug tests by Canelo, the suspension, yada, 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 we've been there. We've talked about that a bunch. You guys know that whole story. Things have changed. And Golovkin feels that he should get more than 65-35 because I guess originally he wasn't crazy about that split to begin with. He kind of bent a little bit, and I think that was some of the delay in the negotiation. Again, this is me giving my thoughts, okay? I'm not saying I was told this in particular, but I think that they weren't quite happy with that negotiation, the 65-35, but they finally bent to make the rematch happen. And there were some things that they wanted that they got. So they agreed to that. Times have changed. They want more. Personally, I think the goal that they're shooting for, again, this is just me estimating here, projecting, I think 60-40. I think 60-40 is completely reasonable, and I think that's ultimately what's going to happen. I still think we're going to get the Canelo rematch in September. However, now, the IBF, the situation there with Sergiy Derevyanchenko. So, once the rematch with Canelo ended, for May 5th because of the suspension and all that stuff, the IBF, they talked about Derevyanchenko. Loeffler went to them and asked for, I think it's the technical word, an appeal for them to fight Vanes Martirosyan, because they wanted more time to negotiate a fight with Derevyanchenko. They feel that's a bigger fight than Vanes Martirosyan, which was more of a stay busy fight. I tend to agree. Golovkin told Loeffler, keep the May 5th date by any means necessary. I am fighting 3 times this year. I don't give a damn. I'm sick of fighting twice a year. I want 3 fights this year. I don't want to fight in June. I don't want to fight in July. I want to fight May 5th and twice more. So Loeffler did what he had to do to keep May 5th. The IBF granted their request, but with the stipulation that they fight Derevyanchenko by August 3rd, which was 90 days from the May 5th fight with Martirosyan. So basically, you've got 90 days after Martirosyan to fight Derevyanchenko. Now notice what I said there. Not to negotiate, go to purse bid, all this, and then map out a fight, do that whole thing. No, no, no. You've got to go through that whole process, negotiating, promoting, and the fight has to happen by August 3rd, which just so happens to be a Friday. So you could take a week off that. Basically, by the end of July, you have to fight Derevyanchenko. Loeffler is his position, and this is what we just talked about on the phone, that will normally, per the IBF rules, and most of the sanctioning organizations work pretty much the same way. There's nuance. It's a little different with each group, but pretty much there is a 30-day, when there's a mandatory situation, there's a 30-day negotiating period. You have 30 days to make a deal. You can't make a deal, it goes through the purse bid process, and that's a certain amount of days. Then, after the purse bid, both fighters agree to terms and they sign the contracts. That takes a few days. Then, it's typically, I believe, 90 days from there that you have to actually do the fight. You could do it before that, but you have up until, I believe it's 90 days. So that whole process there, you're talking 4+ months to make that whole thing happen. That's, and I'm paraphrasing, guys. Some of the rules are a little different depending on which organization. But basically, that's what Loeffler was telling me. Like, look, man, you want us to negotiate all this and fight a dude just a couple of months after having fighting Martirosyan, after this rematch with Canelo fell apart, this whole fiasco. And when they were doing, originally part of the rematch agreement was there were several mandatories due, but the sanctioning organizations pretty much agreed to get an order. And originally, I believe it was the WBC mandatory that was going to come first, then the IBF mandatory. That was the agreement. All that was agreed to by all the parties involved. All that blew up, and I understand that. But if that was the original agreement, let's go by your rules. That's what Loeffler's saying. Let's go by your rules and let's have this detailed process laid out. That's several months, so we can negotiate all this and properly promote a fight. Because, and this is what Tom just told me. Basically, look, Golovkin is one of the premier attractions in the sport. You need more than a couple of months to negotiate, to promote, to do this properly, to put on a real fight. Now, some of you will say, well, what about the Martirosyan fight? That was done last second. Yes, of course. That was a stay busy fight. That was pretty much at Gennady's request. Loeffler pretty much, not necessarily the opponent, but the date, getting something done specifically for that date. They had trained for that date. They were sick of the delays. They wanted to get in the ring. And Triple G has made it very, very clear. Regardless of who they fight this fall, and they're going to fight somewhere around September. Again, I still think it's going to be Canelo, but it could be Derevyanchenko or someone like that. Whoever they fight, they want to fight again probably in December. Now, before I get to December and what's probably going to happen there, let's talk about the WBC with Jermall Charlo, who has fought 2 not very good middleweights to earn this mandatory position. So regardless of how you feel about that, he is technically the WBC mandatory. But Mauricio Sulaiman told Loeffler and Golden Boy, look, we'll put this WBC mandatory off for the Canelo rematch. They told them this, months ago as part of that whole negotiation. Well, now that, things have kind of blown up in the past week, going back and forth between the two camps, Mauricio Sulaiman, who has gone hard pushing for Canelo, trying to keep that relationship intact because it was once very strained recently. He's really, really, really been, it almost feels like he's an offshoot of Golden Boy Promotions at this point. Not with any of their other fighters, specifically with Canelo Alvarez. But he just said this week, I think it was an interview with ESPN Deportes, and it was translated and all that stuff. I think it was through Spanish language and translated through English on a site. I can't remember if it was Boxing Scene or Ring, one of them. Said, look, if Golovkin and Canelo can't make an agreement, Golovkin has to fight Charlo next. I talked to Loeffler about that, and he said the same thing. Like, look, number one, how are we going to fight 2 mandatories at the same time? Number 2, how are we going to negotiate, promote, and put together 2 fights for 2 different guys at the same time? You guys have to work with us and give us some sort of timeline here. And the original agreed upon timeline I already talked about. If that's blown up, okay, let's all come to the table and negotiate this and figure this out. Backtracking real quick. Last week, Loeffler had an appeal hearing in New Jersey with IBF officials at a hotel up there before he took off. He's in Europe right now. He said he talked to them for over 6 hours. 6 hours last week. And they said that they would get back to him with an official ruling on this whole matter within 10 days. Just talked to him. To date, he hasn't heard anything from them. I think tomorrow is the 10th day. They got to get back to him soon. So hopefully we'll have an answer when it comes to Derevyanchenko and the IBF and what they want to do within 24, 48 hours. So, stay tuned for that. Back to the WBC. For Charlo, Loeffler says the same thing. Give us a timeline. A timeline, where we can negotiate a fight. Give us, number one, if he's a mandatory, set a date. The WBC hasn't set a date. The IBF actually did with the August 3rd thing. It just went against their normal rules. And all Loeffler wants is the process through their normal rules. With the BC, they haven't even set a mandatory date yet. They haven't mandated that. So for Suleiman to just say that publicly, that really, I don't know. There's really no substance to it, because typically in a situation like that, if there's a mandatory and you're mandating it, you're making a date, the sanctioning organization says, look, by such and such date, you two have 30 days until this date to negotiate a fight between each other, and then you got 90 days to put on the fight. Generally speaking, that's pretty much how it goes. So the BC hasn't even gone that far yet. So the whole thing related to Charlo, guys, I honestly think that is hot air from Suleiman, who's pushing hard to get the Canelo rematch. Why is he pushing so hard to get the Golovkin-Canelo rematch? I'll leave that up to you to speculate. But I think that that's him helping negotiate that fight, and that's all part of the posturing and what I call the sausage being made, which is a very ugly process to get to that delicious sausage, which is the big fight that would be Canelo and Golovkin 2. Although, some of the luster from that rematch, it's starting to dull, right? Because of all this crap. I think the sausage that process of the sausage being made is becoming a little too ugly, because a lot of fans are getting turned off. Their appetite is, they're not wanting sausage, they're wanting something else right now. So Golden Boy and Loeffler, they need to get together and make this thing happen. I think that's all that was, though, from Suleiman with the BC related to Charlo, because they haven't even set a date. So I wouldn't put too much substance into that. The IBF situation with Derevyanchenko, that's a real thing, though. That's a real thing. We got to see what's going to happen there. Regardless, though, Golovkin's going to fight in the fall, right? They want to fight again at the end of the year. I asked Tom Loeffler about Ryota Murata. He said that they've been in talks with Top Rank. They've been in talks with Bob Arum. Bob Arum wants to fight. Murata wants to fight. Japan has a tradition of putting on cards at the very end of the year, very often on New Year's Eve, on or around New Year's Eve. And so I think that is a very real possibility for this year. And Loeffler said to me, look, if we could go over there at the end of the year, sell out the Tokyo Dome, which, by the way, seats 55,000. That's the capacity for the Tokyo Dome. So over 50,000 fans. If we could sell out that arena, that's a huge fight for boxing. It's a big event. It might not be the biggest matchup on paper, but it's a pretty damn big global, international boxing event. And I've gone on record saying I think that's the biggest fight in Japanese boxing history. A lot of people point to Buster Douglas, Mike Tyson. Yes, that had a huge global impact because it was the greatest upset in sports history, arguably, at least in the top 2 or 3. But both of those guys are American, right? In this situation, you're going to have Ryota Murata, who's a Japanese fighter fighting in Japan. He has the WBA regular title. Golovkin has the WBA super title. So at some point in the future, he's going to be a mandatory for Golovkin. Think of it the same way as the Daniel Jacobs-Golovkin fight. It'd be the same situation, basically. That's going to have to happen at some point regardless. If Golovkin wants to fight 3 times this year, that fight's wide open at the end of the year, right? So I think that's the biggest fight in Japanese boxing history. Murata is a star in Japan. Remember, he's a gold medalist. He won a gold medal in the Olympics. And his last fight against a journeyman did a rating over there in Japan of 17 million. Also, that fight would likely be on regular HBO because it'd be a quote-unquote foreign fight for HBO, so the licensing fees would be cheaper. So HBO wins. They're getting killed right now by Showtime and ESPN. So for them to get Golovkin back on regular HBO in such a big event like that, so cheap, that'd be a win for them. So look, all in all, guys, sit back, be patient. Let's wait to see what the IBF says with their ruling. And I think depending on what they say in their ruling, that's going to be Golovkin and Loeffler's next step.